History is not something that happens in a vacuum, and elements of the past still linger in the present. Also, sometimes history, good or bad, unfortunately or fortunately, can repeat itself. So here today to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is Dr. Brandon Stokes from the University of Illinois. Welcome to CI Living.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about you? What do you teach at U of I?
So I'm a postdoc research scholar in the Department of African American Studies, and I teach about research methods and how to investigate the past so you can understand what's happening in the present so we can make a better future.
I really like that. And so can you talk a little bit about how sometimes history repeats itself and why that happens?
Well, we can see how history repeats itself and there's various things that happen because we as people tend to want to forget negative things. We want to not feel bad about the past. We want to forget that. Like if I break my glasses, I want to forget that I ever did that when I get a new pair. So that's why we do that. But I'll give an example. Look at the protests for Black Lives Matter in the early 2020s, right after the death of George Floyd. And we see the protests and almost what we call uprisings or riots in major cities across the country. These are similar to what happened in 1968, right after Dr. King was assassinated. Riots happened in Chicago, in Newark, in Detroit. And so these things are happening. This is not a new thing that happened. I tell my students, like, because they listen to hip-hop music, I'm like, this is the remix, and we are back again.
Right.
But this is your opportunity to make sure that these things are not happening again for your children.
That's a really important message to send along. And how can the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday inspire us to sort of, like you said, look back and maybe make improvements in our current world?
Well, when we look at the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday, it's the third week of January every year, and it's always, we have what I like to call the holiday king, the mythologized king, where they always play the I Have a Dream speech. They only played the last third of the speech. They never played the first two-thirds of the speech where he's talking about poverty, where he's talking about hard discrimination, where he's talking about death, where he's talking about the hardships of being black in America. We never hear about the part. We always hear about the dream, and a lot of conservatives like to say, well, Martin Luther King said you can't discriminate people by color, but do we really not do that in this country? That's still happening. And we have this holiday king that looks at Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream speech, pre-1965. So pre-1965, we have the March on Washington in 1963. We have the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. In 1965, the passage of the Voting Rights Act. So racism is solved. Everything is good in America. But then Dr. Martin King went north. So Martin Luther King moved to Chicago in 1966 to talk about urban housing and discrimination in the north. But African Americans could vote in Chicago, but they still were living in poverty. So he went to attack poverty, and that's where he started what he likes to call the beloved community. This idea of everyone going against racism, militarism, and poverty, and creating the Poor People's Campaign, which was the essence of building what now known as a Rainbow Coalition, which inspired Fred Hampton, Harold Washington, Jesse Jackson, and what Barack Obama used to become the first African-American president of this country. So the post-65 king was one that we don't highlight because that was the king, if you look at Pew Research, he was hated by a majority of white Americans post-1965 because of what he said against the Vietnam War, attacking poverty. And that's the king we need to focus on, the king that not only wanted us to love each other, but he wanted us to work together to fight against everyone being oppressed, building this beloved community.
And what do you think would be a good way for us to work together? Because as you mentioned earlier, people don't necessarily like to remember the bad things, or they don't want to look at something negative that happened. So how would you encourage people to sort of have open conversations and work together to make a better world?
Well, one thing, a lot of people, when we talk about the past, it almost feels like you're talking something bad about me. And that's what we need to get past thinking about ourselves and living in someone else's shoes. We're not trying to make a world better just for my family. I'm not trying to, my house is on fire. I'm not trying to just put out the house in my house.
Sure.
I'm trying to make sure the fire doesn't touch you either.
Right.
It's what we're seeing in California right now, in Los Angeles with the fire. We want everyone working together, and the main thing is to look past yourself and to look at other people and see the humanity in other people. To see, you know, you may look different. You may worship a different God or not worship God at all. You may like someone of the same sex. You may feel you're not the sex that you were born as.
Sure.
But you are worth it. Your humanity is something worth fighting for. And that is what people must see.
Thank you so much for being here. All of that is such an important message, and I really appreciate you coming in and sharing that with us.
It's wonderful. I love to share love. That's what we all need now.
The world definitely needs a lot more kindness.
Thank you.
Well, if you would like more information or would like to rewatch this segment, you can visit us on the web at ciliving.tv.